Just like today's Coca-Cola contains no coca anymore, the tea, tobacco, and frankincense of 1600s contained very little of actual tea, tobacco, and frankincense. The main ingredients were, in fact, opium, coca, and hashish. Back then, at the very least.
Greetings, this is Eugene the Philosopher, the greatest living philosopher after the unfortunate passing of Quentin Robert de Nameland, who has been the greatest living philosopher before me. Yet another pretty long video with a huge amount of notes, so I have to share my screen again. Let's roll.
Okay, I'm honestly a bit terrified because there's a whole lot to talk about, as you can see probably here, right? But I'll be very surprised if I'll manage to do it in like 40 minutes or something, but let's try. So basically, most of what I'm talking about here, if not all actually, well, not all actually, comes from this post, which I will link in the description. So you can see that it's a research that involved help from a lot of, people. So I can't even attribute it to someone singular, but I'll give you this link. It's in Russian, but you can obviously translate it through any sort of resource you like, okay? And also I have to give a disclaimer right away because we're going to be talking about drugs, and I have to say that drugs are bad, okay? Don't take them. Like, it's not worth it, honestly. We're going to be dealing with history here, and specifically like history of colonization and a lot of bad stuff, like objectively, okay? So I'm not promoting anything here. I'm not, advertising anything here. I'm just trying to give you a clue of how the previous, let's say, 5 centuries of history, specifically regarding international trade, were severely, severely understated, let's put it this way, the drug trade, okay? That's the point. And I'm not talking about drugs per se, what they do to you, and what you should or should not do to them. Again, if you want to know my opinion, they are bad for you, so don't take them. However, historically speaking, again, when we've had virtually no medicine, okay, what we can currently consider as heavy drugs were mostly used as medicine, again, as painkillers. Like, for example, opium was basically the only known painkiller until the middle of 19th century. And most of antidotes even contained theriac, so-called, which is a mixture of opium and wine or something else, like depending on the region. So again, if anything, it gave some sort of placebo effect. So, people just kind of calmed down a little bit, etc. And poisonings were really frequent in, let's say 17th century again, due to mostly poor sanitation, hygiene, like various epidemics, like telluric and volcanic gases, etc. Like, it's not like we're talking about, deliberate poisonings, aka assassinations or something. Anyway, so really, the massive drug abuse became a problem in like late 19th century, all right? But anyway, the disclaimer is still true. Drugs are bad. Don't take them, okay? So hopefully with this out of the way, let's discuss. I have 3 main topics I want to talk about, again, following these guys. So the first topic I want to touch is frankincense, okay? The incenses, I actually don't know how you stress it in English, but it doesn't really matter. They use in church, or they used actually in the past. So frankincense, actually, what you call frankincense in English right now, is actually, in Greek, it's called laudanon, right? Or right now you call it olibanum in Latin, right? But in New Testament, for example, frankincense is called Libanos, right? So basically something that comes from Lebanon. And in Russian, in modern Russian even, it's called ladan, right? So ladanon, ladan, kind of the same word, right? But if you look at the word laudanum, even right now, it means tincture of opium. So it's basically an ethanol solution of opium, right? And it comes from the Latin word, actually, laudare, right? The verb, to praise, right? To praise God or something, right? Interesting. So my point, actually, again, not my point of these people. I'm just kind of parroting them here. But I think it's a very solid point, is that there is a strong case to be made that historically, what we call frankincense, like for example in New Testament, right, is actually opium, right? Like Libanos, laudanon is laudanum. It's opium, essentially. So then the word laudanum and other related ones was slowly transferred to frankincense. So basically, the share of opium in the incenses that were used in the church slowly decreased, okay? I actually don't know what this link will give us. Let's take a look. So, laudanum or ledanum, the resinous juice obtained from the shrub laudanum. Yeah, so this would be the modern understanding of frankincense, right? Of incenses of the church. However, if you look at the earlier etymology, I think it kind of hints that it was actually opium, right? So it would seem, again, I kind of just told you this, right? So in the end, the opium only remained in medical laudanum, and the churches used bare frankincense or maybe some other incenses in their thuribles. Is that how you say it in English? I don't know. There are a couple of curious artifacts, like for example this book by José Acosta, Historia Natural y Moral de las Indias. I don't know, I don't speak Spanish, sorry, but I'll show you the book anyway. So this is the book from 1608. The book itself is actually quite a little bit older, but it's the edition from 1608. And what can you see? The guy is a Jesuit, by the way. You see, compuesta por el padre Joseph de Acosta, religioso de la Compañía de Jesús. So Compañía de Jesús is a Society of Jesus, right? The Jesuits. And Joseph de Acosta is the guy, right? And what is this? It's a poppy, right? It's opium. Interesting. Poppy head, right? So and the book itself, it's actually like India's. He mostly talks about America there, and he talks about coca production in America, but we'll get to coca, don't worry. So since 1500s, coca was actually used widely in Americas to boost the productivity of locals, but then again, we'll get there. Another artifact from supposedly 1325, but don't believe this date, my opinion, is this Madonna of the Poppy, right? By Paolo Veneziano, and obviously Veneziano is not a last name, it's just Paolo from Venice, okay? So you see the typical, depiction of Madonna with Emmanuel, aka Jesus of the New Testament, with a poppy plant. Interesting, right? Poppy flower specifically. Well, anyway, so Paolo from Venice, right? Venice traded with Egypt, and Egypt was a major source of opium, right? Which was imported into Venice through Alexandria, right? And I mean, the Venetians owned the port of Alexandria, just as I've highlighted in this video of mine, where we talk about the pyramids and the state of Egypt in general in 17th century. Then we have the whole story of Myrrh. Like I'm really trying to be quick here, like, right? You can see. So I'm not gonna be very solid in my argumentation. I don't really wanna make any arguments here, really. I'm just want to spill out the point to you, okay? So hopefully you will get the point, and you may disagree or agree with it. You may do your own research. You may argue with me in the comments, etc., etc. So I'll try to be quick again. So Myrrh, right? One of the how do you call it? Gifts that the Magi brought to Jesus, according to the legend. They brought gold, myrrh, and laudanum, right? Basically. So, yeah. Myrrh, currently, it's considered to be, sorry, that's the wrong thing, this thing. Right? So, one of the incenses used by the church. And apparently, it was everywhere in Egypt. For example, there's this apocryphal legend about Mary again, about El Matarea. I think I have it somewhere here. Yeah, this one. So apparently there's this tree, right, where Virgin Mary and Saint Joseph stopped at. And in 1500s, only monasteries were allowed to grow it, the myrrh, I mean, and curiously, Muslims were not allowed there. But kind of like it's a very vague point, but the point is that Egypt was the main source of opium for Europe, okay, at least in these early ages. So maybe it wasn't myrrh, maybe it was something else, all right? And also, one other artifact I want to show you is this woodcut of Asia, okay? Sort of personified Asia. So this is Asia, according to who? According to this guy, I think. Adrien Colère. Like I've read it in French, obviously he's Dutch. I don't know how to read it in Dutch, sorry. So this is the, what's the word, sorry? Turtable, right? This is the turtable of Asia. So apparently it's a very important thing. And you can see all of the exotic animals. And obviously, I mean, when they said Asia, they kind of meant Egypt as well, right? You can see rhinos, elephants, camels. This is a giraffe, I don't know, actually. But yeah, but this is Asia. And apparently, this thing is very important. All right. And Pliny the Elder actually talks about the leaves of laughter, gelotophilis, right? Which basically means cannabis, right? And we also remember the order of hashashins, which comes from the word cannabis, or vice versa, actually. Hashish, right? Hashish is cannabis, essentially. Yeah. But this was like a special organization, right? Mostly the church used opiates, right? And to sort of give you another hint why there's a case to be made that frankincense of the early church, like 1300s through 1800s actually, they used opium instead of frankincense, or at least in a combination with frankincense. Let's consider the structure of a tabernacle of the Old Testament. Again, in my books, Old Testament is like 1300s through, let's say, 1600s. Okay, new chronology. I mean, basically 700s through 400 years ago. Okay, I have it somewhere here. Yeah, so the tabernacle, right, where the Jewish, in quotation marks, people gathered, actually like any sort of Old Testament believers. So you have this thing, the altar, where you burn the sacrifice, right? But the tabernacle itself, look at all of this smoke. So what did they do there is burn incense, right? In this tent. And notice how this tent is highly isolated, right? They cover it heavily to keep the smoke inside, essentially. And why do you want to keep the smoke inside? Is for everyone in to inhale it, right? So this is a good sort of indication that they were inhaling something funny, like opium, for example, right? So perhaps these early incenses, like myrrh in quotation marks, frankincense in quotation marks, were not really what we understand as myrrh and frankincense today. This probably was opium, right? And hence the connection to Egypt, because Egypt was the major source of opium in these early centuries of civilization, aka like 14th through, well, let's say 15th, okay? And remember this quote of Marx, that religion is the opium for the people. It's actually much less metaphorical, at least according to this paradigm, than people believe, right? It could have been actually literally true that the Universal Catholic Church, by the way, like the terms I use here all come from, or not come from, but could be understood if you watch this video, Brief History of the Church. So as you can see, it's all very recent, okay? So yeah. So religion was probably literally opium, because that's what they used during their masses and sermons, okay? So we've considered the first part, the smallest one actually, the frankincense that was used in the churches, which was probably not frankincense but opium, or in some cases perhaps hashish, aka cannabis. All right. Let's talk about tobacco. So these are all the names of tobacco. I'm not gonna it's actually not even all the names, okay? Some. I'll return to them sometime later. I just don't want to waste time listing them all. So the point is, again, the main point I will propel here is that what people have called tobacco in, let's say, 16th century and up to 19th, I would say, is not just tobacco proper, sometimes not even tobacco at all, or at least in our modern understanding of the word, but it could have been salvia, divinorum, or whatever they call it, the Mexican salvia, the funny one, or other funny herbs, okay? And the thing is that most of the tobaccos, if you read the old books, like even the books from 18th century, they're talking about drinking tobacco, interestingly, right? A la Indian bhang. I actually don't know how to pronounce it in English, but anyway, what is bhang? It's a tincture of cannabis, okay? I'm not even sure if it's a tincture. Maybe it's not non-alcoholic. Like tincture implies ethanol. Could be just tea. But anyway, a strong point to be made, just like previously, there was a strong point to be made that frankincense of old was actually opium. So here, a strong point to be made was that American tobacco is actually coca, okay? Perhaps not entirely, but the main, punch was from coca. So people used to drink it, okay? Because you just basically make tea out of coca leaves. Kind of like today we make tea out of tea leaves, actually, if we look at the even 1860s, like today we smoke tobacco, right? But what did they do with it previously? Like again, they were mostly drinking, but not only. Let's look at the data of, or at least some research, about Virginia, which was the biggest state in tobacco output, or tobacco, in quotation marks, in America, and North Carolina. So these two states had, like just before the Civil War, 348 tobacco factories, but only 6 of them made smoking tobacco. I have to make an asterisk here. This is not entirely true. It was 6 only for cigarettes, okay? But there was some for cigars as well. There is a source somewhere here. This one. No, not this one. This one. So 348, again, I'll link this. Factories, 6 were making tobacco, making smoking tobacco used in cigarettes, and the rest were making plug, chewing tobacco, right? And twist, cigar tobacco. So we don't really know how much of them were making plug versus twist, but the point is that cigarettes were a minority, and well, the way they phrase it, it looks like plug was more important than twist, So, yeah. So the rest was mostly for chewing and sniff. And when I say the rest, it's like the majority, actually, right? And it looks a whole lot like what they do with the funny herbs like betel, I don't know, in India and Southeast Asia, even right now, actually, or coca leaf in Americas, right? People were chewing it mostly. And in Bangladesh, India, Persia, Central Asia, like people make tea with hashish. Again, remember this hang thing, for example, right? Like, I'm still not sure about this word. Maybe I was cooked when I was writing this. I don't know. Because alcoholic tea is some next level, right? Maybe hang is not alcoholic. I don't know. Like, let me do this. Maybe it's not tincture actually. Anyway, in Russia, for example, also, I mean, by Russia, I mean places like Russia, Ukraine, there were a lot of cannabis actually grown, but it was mostly for hemp, for ropes, for sailcloth, for things like these. And nobody smoked it until middle of 20th century, actually. Though obviously the narcotic effects were known, right? I mean, with this scale, it would be kind of, surprising if it wasn't. Anyway, and in Paris in 1840s, there was this club of hashish eaters. Let me show it to you. This one. And they were eating it, okay? Nobody was smoking cannabis back then. So the point I'm making, kind of, is that nobody smoked tobacco until at least 19th century. So this legend of Columbus arriving to Cuba or wherever and seeing people smoking tobacco is BS. And I'll show you one more point why it's BS a little bit later. But anyway, hashish, cannabis smoking, only appeared in 20th century actually, and tobacco smoking, again, it's 1820s roughly. Like, look at these numbers. In 1826, Britain, already a world hegemon at this point, they've defeated France, right? It imports 12 kilograms of cigars, okay? And 4 years later, already 114 tons, so 10,000 times increase in just 4 years, right? So this is where smoking became a thing, roughly in late 1820s. Before that, people only rarely smoked. And remember, these numbers I gave you were already much later, okay? So yeah, and the first cigarette making machine appeared in 1847. If you look at the US, it's early 20th century, 21-fold increase in cigarette sales. So it looks like smoking was not a centuries-old thing, at this point. It was rather novel. Like, specifically, the world hegemon only adopts it kind of late, 1820s, late 1820s. And in Russia, actually, you couldn't even smoke until 1860s. It was banned in the cities, at least. So the sniffing tobacco was much more popular previously, right? And this point, again, that kind of invalidates the idea of Cubans, like native Cubans smoking, is that modern tobacco, which is this Nicotiana tabacum, it's a very fragile hybrid of Nicotiana sylvestris, which grows in Argentina, and Nicotiana tormentosiformis from Bolivia, right? And perhaps, like some researchers argue, also a smudge, is that the word, of Nicotiana otophora, right? So it's very unlikely that this hybrid will happen naturally. So it could, like, most likely it was bred by the colonists around 1820s, specifically for smoking, right? Why 1820s? Well, because this is when the history of smoking begins, and I mean mass smoking. Obviously, I mean someone smoked something sometime before that, but the mass smoking is what I'm talking about. And compare these dates, 1820s, to the introduction of Peruvian cotton in 1810s or Egyptian sugarcane in 1830s into the US, specifically the southeastern states like Louisiana, right? And the same cotton actually from Peru appears in Algeria and Egypt in the same time frame, and then in India later, when Britain kind of reinforced its colonization effort. So basically the point here is that there were a lot of effort to sort of shuffle these agricultural plants everywhere, right? So it would kind of make sense for tobacco, the modern tobacco, to be produced in the same time frame, and thus it would make sense if the smoking would also appear in the same time frame, because, well, that's what they tried to achieve, apparently, at the very least. Okay, so yeah, so the conclusion from this, I'm trying to estimate how long. It's actually okay. It's kind of okay. I think we can deal with it in half an hour. Anyway, the conclusion is that until 1820s, tobacco, in quotation marks, and plus the names above, and by the names above I mean these, okay, meant some psychoactive herbal mixtures, including mostly coca, most likely, but also perhaps salvia, again, salvia divinorum, this psychotropic, psychoactive plant, could be hashish as well, and perhaps tobacco too, like one of these tobaccos, right? Not bred yet. And it was mostly actually people drinking it as a tea, in quotation marks, or chewing it. That was actually, like, if we're talking about Peru, of, let's say, 16th century, of silver miners in Peru, they were mostly chewing it, actually, okay? Or sniffed, maybe. And speaking of sniffing, it was actually, like, in Europe, it was the main, I would claim at least, way of consumption of tobacco, still in quotation marks, meaning mostly coca, right? So people were sniffing it. So it was burnt coca mixed with tobacco, mixed with dried tobacco. So the whole culture of snuff boxes, snuff is supposedly, I mean, sniffing tobacco, but then again, if you sniff tobacco alone, it makes no sense. It's just unpleasant. It's so slow, and it's very unpleasant, okay? But there were a whole lot of snuff boxes where supposedly sniffing tobacco was placed, and they were really, really rich. They were highly decorated. Like, look at this. And there's like tens of thousands of them remaining. Okay, so it was really widespread all across Europe, including Russia, for example. So it's an 18th century snuff box. Okay, so supposedly it contained sniffing tobacco, and like there's much more of this. Okay, like this is snuff box, right? Like, look at how rich it is. Like, you wouldn't put something cheap in there, right? It must be something really funny. Okay. And actually, let me show you this picture. This is another snuff box, which literally shows the coca plant. This is the coca plant, which kind of speaks for itself. I mean, here you probably had a portrait or some, initials of the owner or something like this. So yeah, I think it's kind of speaking for itself. Yeah, I just showed it to you. So the main punch of sniffing tobacco, if you sniff it, was coca. The main punch of chewing tobacco, if you chewed it, was coca. Okay? And the drinking also was coca. Could have been hashish, but probably mostly coca, because it was mostly an American thing. You have plenty of hashish, plenty of cannabis in Asia as well. Yeah. And speaking of specifically South America, right? Already in 1535, the Bishop of Cusco, I think I spelled it incorrectly, it doesn't matter. He took taxes, the tithes, is that how you pronounce it? The church tax in coca plants, actually. And coca was widely used in Roman, why do I say Roman again? Watch my video, actually 2 videos. Fake Olds and a brief history of the church. So it was Roman Empire, long story short. So the silver mines, for example, the biggest one in Cerro Rico, Cerro is probably too Italian over Cerro, maybe, I don't know. Sierra, the rich mountain, basically, which was discovered, the biggest silver deposit in Bolivia, at least, in 1545, which became the main source of silver for Roman coins. The same lead isotope ratio is an ancient, in quotation mark, Roman coins. Anyway, so the miners, they were basically chewing coca 24/7. It was used as a stimulant, okay? Because again, it's a stimulant, you know. Cocaine is a stimulant. So this is a quote from one of the theses, actually. Let me try to find it somewhere here. This one. Greetings and all activities. Again, I'll link all of this. I mean, it's obviously quoted from somewhere else, but I didn't bother to look. Greetings and all activities are initiated with an exchange of coca, and all contracts are sealed with it. Indians, meaning Peruvian Indians specifically, work for coca. Its currency value is more stable than any Andean country's money. Okay. By Andean, they mean the Andes, the mountains. Okay. In 1583, natives in Peru actually consumed 1,150 tons of coca in this year alone, which means 1 kilogram per person in this year. That's quite a lot, you know. But the question is, was it just a local phenomenon? I think it is unlikely. Like, consider this: forensic toxicology. And I mean local for South America, for example. We've already looked at the snuff boxes of Europe, right? But also consider this: the forensic toxicology, like actual physical, you know, probing of dead bodies, have shown that Europeans have used coca already in early 1600s at the very least. And I'll show you the paper here. This, boom, right? So 17th century, that is 1600s, brain tissue. So they've examined an actual brain tissue with active components of coca plant was found, right? So Europeans have been high on coca as early 1600s, which fits perfectly with our time frame, right? When natives are high, it all goes to Europe eventually, okay? And then again, perhaps as early as 1559. Why do I think so? It's because this Jean Nicot, according to the legend, this is, by the way, Nicot, the word nicotine comes from this last name. If this is the last name, like whatever you consider. Never mind. Like this guy was an ambassador, right? A French diplomat, and he's famous for being the first to bring tobacco to France, or, you know, quotation marks, tobacco, right? Including snuff tobacco. I would say mostly snuff tobacco, because, again, before 1820s, nobody actually smoked, at least en masse, tobacco, right? As we've kind of deliberated already. So he sent tobacco, basically coca, right, sniffing tobacco, to Catherine Medici, the Queen of France, to help her with her headaches. Hence, some of the names of tobacco referring to Catherine of France, like Herbe Catarine, actually Herbe Catarine, or Medici. You know, Medici is Medici. Why is the family of Medici called Medici? It's because it means medics, right? Doctors. And what does it mean to be a doctor? Is having access to drugs, basically, right? So Medici are drug traders, essentially, quite literally, right? It's a cartel, right? Or Herbe à l'ambassadeur. Who is the ambassador? It's Nicot, right? This guy, etc., etc. Or Tabac du Peru, the tobacco from Peru, right? Meaning coca, essentially, right? So this is the tobacco, aka coca, essentially. Yeah, and again, remember, once again, I reference my video about pyramids. They actually took down the website that I actually show in this video. Like, I scroll through it. They took down this page. Like, I couldn't access it today, for example, when I was preparing the links for this. So I can't show it to you anymore, but at least you can watch the video and see it. When people have actually, again, forensically tested Egyptian mummies in like 1990s and perhaps a little bit later, and they found that 65 out of 80 mummies of ancient Egypt, in quotation marks, supposedly like 3,000 years ago, they tested positive for cocaine, right? And often tobacco as well, okay? Which kind of means that ancient Egypt is, again, 1600s AD, okay? So it was probably coca arrived to Egypt through Venice, again, in 1600s. And this just solidifies my point that the pyramids, for example, are only 400 years old. It's not even my point, but anyway, who cares, right? So in Philadelphia, people made actually cigars and cigarettes of coca leaves instead of paper. I'm trying to accelerate, so apologies for this. And then again, the coca consumption have spread into the masses at some point. Like, for example, there was this coca wine called Vin Mariani. This one, okay, was very popular in late 1800s. Even the popes were actually advertising it. Look, it's Pope Leo XIII. He was a big fan of coca wine. So it's basically a wine with coca leaves, okay? So it has this cocaine punch to it. He actually awarded, and Pius X, another pope, was also a fan. So I think Leo XIII actually awarded this Mariani guy with some Vatican medal for inventing this wine, okay? And then, as you may know, Pemberton introduced coca wine to America in 1885, and then he created a non-alcoholic coca drink named Coca-Cola in 1886, which became arguably the most famous drink in history, okay? Yeah, so there you go. Same thing, okay? According to this book, which I'm gonna show it to you right now, it's by Sir Markham Clements. Actually, I don't know where the last name is. It doesn't really matter. But it's from 1862, so, serious guy, apparently. He's a sir, after all. So he says that he talks about this year specifically, 1862. So it looks like it's contemporary, right, to the book, roughly. So annual yield, I don't know if you can see this, annual yield of coca throughout South America, including Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Pasto. I actually don't know what Pasto is, but it doesn't really matter. May be estimated at more than 30 million pounds, okay? So that would be roughly 13,000 tons plus, okay? So I made a little calculation, and I've arrived at a figure of 50 milligrams of pure cocaine annually per person on the whole planet, okay? Including newborn children, including senile people, etc. And considering like 90% of people actually never consumed any of this, and considering that probably half of the remaining 10% are dirt poor anyway and cannot afford it, etc., etc. So it's a lot of cocaine per person, So 50 milligrams is actually of pure cocaine is actually like one dose, roughly. One good dose, Yeah. So the question is, where's all of it, Like we see the production, right? It's huge, it's gigantic, just in South America. But it's the main source. But where's it going? Like we see it being produced, we see it being loaded on ships, but we don't see any trade in accounting books, So there's something shady going on here, right? And keep in mind that we're talking about like leaves mostly, because chemical, the powder only appears in 1880s. Like you need some really sophisticated process to extract it from the leaves, etc., etc. And it only appears in America, for example, on the streets in 1910s. Like factory owners were giving it to specifically black workers, actually, and it was such a horrible mess, actually. But anyway, also a fun fact that in 1931, Japan suddenly became the world leader in cocaine production. I don't know how to treat it otherwise than just highlight the importance of, this international cartel of bankers and drug traders in the rise of fascism, basically. And that's kind of the only comment I can make here, right? So why don't we see this coca, this huge mass of coca? And by the way, this guy, he actually says, I don't know if it's on the same page. Yeah, it's actually on the same page. So the duration of coca in a sound state on the coast is about 5 months, after which it loses flavor, etc. So you basically have to sell it quickly, within the same year, pretty much, right? So you cannot store it in this form. So it had to be sold somewhere. But where is it going? It's a question, right? Well, the answer is simple. It's tobacco. It's specifically this sniffing, chewing tobacco. Or some other shady medicines. Or maybe even, drum roll, transition, boom, tea. Specifically, there is a type of tea called mate or mate. I don't know how you pronounce it in English again. And it's actually called, at least one of the variants of mate, it's called mate de coca, which kind of speaks for itself, right? Like it's a tea made of coca leaves, right? Or yerba mate, which means mate on herbs, right? Or just mate. And people say, that coca tea actually tastes like green tea. And funny fact, again, I've shown you this Jesuit guy coat of arms with the poppy. Well, Jesuits not only traded opium, they also apparently traded coca, right? Because I'll show you the picture, actually. So this is coca versus mate. So this is the number of a document, and this is years, okay? So coca is yellow and mate is blue, right? And so Jesuits were banned in 1773. It's like roughly here. So boom, mate disappears. And then the Pope actually restored them after 18 something. And mate reappeared. so it's so funny, actually. Yeah. Well, anyway. There is an interesting pattern of people actually, like some textbooks say, there were fraudulent people who were adding lime, potassium carbonate, or ash into tea before it reached the consumer, like, for example, a British ship arrives to India or wherever, it takes tea on board, and then while it sails, or maybe when it arrives to the port or whatever, like somebody adds all kinds of stuff to the tea to kind of, increase the weight, basically. So there will be less tea, but more weight. So therefore you can get more profit because you add a whole bunch of useless stuff to it, right? So they say it's fraud, right? But if you look at the exact components, ash, potassium carbonate, lime, it actually looks a whole lot like a tool for better extraction of alkaloids, specifically from opium, okay? To enhance the effect. Like there's a so-called lipta, it's double L, L-L-ipta powder. And I actually had a link here which led to a website that sells it, but I probably cannot show it, at least if this video can even appear on YouTube, so I kind of killed it. So this Lipta powder is specifically designed to enhance the effect of chewing coca leaves, okay? And it guess what it contains? It contains lime and ash, right? So doesn't this kind of speak for itself, right? Like, it wasn't tea, it was something else, which was enhanced by adding lime and ash. It's like like whatever, the taste expanders, the taste enhancers. I forgot how it's called. Sodium, this thing. Damn, I forgot that they make it from this Japanese seaweed. I forgot. I forgot the English thing, the English name for it. But anyway, it's the same thing, but for opium, right? And also Bolivian, specifically Lipta, contain anise, like whatever you pronounce it in English. And remember that anise was also used in 19th century in absinthe production, right? To the same effect, to enhance the narcotic properties of the drink, right? To kind of release these alkaloids. So where does the tea come from? Essentially, it's again drinks like bhang, which we already mentioned, which is a hashish-based drink, which I kind of vaguely remember. I was alluding that it's not a tincture, probably. And then remember the tea ceremonies, which is like tea. We should also, take in quotation marks, because it hell of a lot of ritualized drug preparation and consumption vibes, And let's talk about the famous British tea obsession. So before 1700s, tea was basically unknown to the British, right? But in the span of 4 years or 5 years, depending on how you count, they already import 90 tons. Then they open a first tea shop, again, in quotation marks, and look at the following dynamic and tell me it's not a drug, okay? 1723, 453 tons. Like a century later, it's like, 2 orders of magnitude higher. Then it increases threefold in 30 years. And then in 1897, it still increases 1 order of magnitude. So it's 4.5 kilograms per capita of the UK, It's quite a lot, because even today we have 1.9 kilograms per capita, okay? Why is that? Why are the British suddenly drinking so much less tea, like two times less, actually more than 2 times? Well, maybe it's not the same tea anymore, So it's very strange if you look at this from financial perspective, let's put it this way. Like very expensive stuff, like legit, like coca or opium, you never find it in accounting books, right? It's just completely ignored. But the cheap stuff like the tea and tobacco is everywhere. It's being shipped by thousands of tons. Huh? What's the deal? Well, obviously, the tea, it's not quite the tea we know. It's some funny tea. Again, it's probably a mixture of legit tea plus the kicker, as they say in rocket science, the kick stage. The opium. It's a hidden drug trade. There was this term called the tea race or something like this, where they took actually could have been some other term, I don't quite remember, where they took the fastest ships and they loaded them with tea. Well, I think with tea. It was opium, it's not tea, okay? So let's look at opium. I mean, not only tea proper, what we understand currently is tea. It was opium, mostly. So the kick stage was the opium. So the opium production in 1907 was 41,000 tons over the world. Mostly China, 35,000. Then India, 6,000. Again, both kind of British colonies. I know people would not like me saying that China was a British colony at that point, but I don't really care. Anyway, the biggest trade fleet was British at this point. So it was the British exporting this from China. And only a smudge, again, I encounter the same word in my mental palace, is in Turkey. And I've calculated this a little bit based on some Russian people's findings. Actually, it wasn't me. It was these guys. Okay. I'm just following them. So they've calculated how many doses that would be annually, again, in 1907. That would be about 1 trillion of doses of opium if you smoke it, okay? Which means it's order of magnitude kind of estimation, right? 9 doses per day per every person on the planet. Again, including newborn children, including dirt poor people, including people who never smoked opium in the first place and never will, etc. So that's a whole truckload of opium, you know? And again, the question is, where's it going to? Like, who's getting it? Like, we see it being produced. But we never see it being, bought or imported. Like, there's this legend of Chinese being all essentially high on opium. But if it was only the Chinese that they just overdosed, like all of them, like it makes no sense. So besides this inner consumption in tea, also in tobacco, like remember the smoking boom of late 1800s, it was probably also added in all kinds of stuff, right? And once again, we're dealing with essentially a hidden drug trade. Like the Dutch actually did a very similar thing when they were doing their colonial stuff. It was called Madak or Madak, I don't know. Again, a blend of opium and tobacco. Just what we talked about in the coca thing of Americas, right? Yeah, it's a thing. Then in 1909, there was this first steps towards prohibition. Again, people probably figured out, this was kind of the peak actually, 1907. People kind of figured out that it's kind of bad, So there was this commission, where is it? This, right? First steps towards international prohibition. So yeah, and again, why is it Shanghai? Because it's it's China, right? It's the main producer of drugs at this point in history. And then remember this guy, James Buchanan Duke. So in 1885, it's an American guy, by the way. So in 1885, he gets a license for a cigarette machine. Like remember, there was this date of 1847, right? I'm not sure if it was the same machine, could have been some other, but anyway, he acquired the license, okay? And in just like 30 years roughly, he controls 92% of the world's tobacco market. How's this possible? Maybe it's because it was tobacco market, not tobacco market. Maybe it was mixed with opium. That's kind of my point, right? Because how else would you get this advantage against anyone else? Well, then the question would be, well, if he was making this opium-flavored tobacco in America, like he should have had some money to pay for it, right? How was it paid for, right? Well, there is this mysterious story of fake bonds of 1934, actually. Or fake in quotation marks, I actually don't know. Like, it's a conspiracy theory of its own, but the story of the conspiracy goes that Americans have brought a lot of opium from China, right? And then they paid the Chinese leaders with these fake bonds. Or, fake. Like, I actually don't know if they're fake. Maybe they were actually true. But then the American government said, oh, no, we have nothing to do with this, okay? Like you can see, Chiang Kai-shek received them, aka the leader of China at that point. So yeah, Well, that's a conspiracy theory of its own. Anyway, but the story of these opium wars, so-called, in China makes no sense. Like the story goes that the British exported all the useful stuff out of China and imported opium instead. So Chinese became drug addicts on opium and blah blah blah. But how? If China is the main producer of opium, where are you gonna import it from? If it's the main producer, like, you don't have to import it. Like, what the hell? It makes no sense. I'm telling you. And also the tea makes no sense. Unless the tea is actually an opium spiked tea. Yeah? And the British are exporting it from China, or like importing it into the UK from China. That would be a proper structure, linguistic one. Anyway, there was one thing I forgot to show you when we talked about the Spanish Empire. Okay, so there is this thing called Spanish treasure fleet. So we already talked about how Spain was using coca to mine silver, roughly here, and also here in Mexico, right? But look at the routes of these galleons. Wait, I need the caption. So white is West Indies or transatlantic route, begun in 1492. So the white is the earlier one. Okay, what did they do early? So they loaded silver here, and then where do they go? Boom, they go there through Pacific into Manila, into Philippines. So they've loaded their galleons with silver and went into Asia. And from there, they went back here and then to Europe. What were they paying? Why did they need silver in Asia, the Spanish? Weren't they buying some funny herbs here? From China, from India, Huh? And then bringing them to Europe as well, like this. Also notice, by the way, it's not our current topic, but still, nobody uses the Drake's Strait because there's horrific winds. So the legend about Magellan, whatever you pronounce him in English, is BS. Okay. So all the sane people were, sailing through Atlantic here. They never went here. Okay. Well, hopefully you get the idea, right? The Spanish, with their silver, they were going to Asia, buying something with the silver, and then returning, and then going to Europe. Yeah. Well, finally, we're in the conclusion section, singular. So there's plenty of conclusions as well. Well, let's sprint through it. So smoking tobacco only appeared on the markets in 1820s, on mass markets, I mean, and did not become popular until 1860s, roughly. So what people mean when they say tobacco in 1500 through 1800s basically means some drinkable or sniffable or chewable mixture of funny herbs. Probably including tobacco itself, though it's a question, but firstly and mostly coca, okay? Or maybe salvia, especially salvia divinorum, the Mexican funny plant, or maybe cannabis, okay? So literally the tobacco trade of 16th through late 19th century, it is a drug trade. Tobacco trade is literally a drug trade back then. In our current terms, that's what I mean. Then frankincense and myrrh and other incenses of the church, and I mean the word church just like I meant it in this video, the church, okay, with the proper datings. So the incenses they've used during masses and sermons and blah 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 since 1300s and perhaps until even late 19th 19th century, so late 1800s, is opium. Okay, so Marx was right, though I hate to say it. So people had a reason to go to church. People had a reason to get into the tabernacle, I actually don't know how you pronounce it, because look at this funny stuff, and we isolate it, right, for a reason, with these carpets and stuff, and then again you get the explanation of the spices from Asia being so important and so expensive, right? Think about this, like Middle Ages, according to mainstream history, people are dirt poor. Like people don't even eat meat. They can barely afford bread, and somehow there's a huge demand on spices. Like, does it make any sense? No, it doesn't. Even if you're dirt poor, though, you would have a demand on some funny herbs if you have an addiction, right? So there you go. Think about this. Then the tea, in quotation marks, that the British were importing from India and China is also opium, or maybe cannabis sometimes, right? In the form of hashish, the compressed cannabis, right? So essentially here we're dealing with a huge problem of hidden drug trade on a massive scale, which persisted for centuries actually, at least 4 centuries. So the question is, how come no one notices this except for these people? Again, people only remember funny things like very expensive spices from Asia for no reason. Just like as if you couldn't have just, planted pepper in Italy or Spain or North Africa or, Lebanon or wherever. Maybe you can't actually. I don't know. I'm not a biologist. But anyway, like really, they were that expensive. Really, the British really loved the tea so much. Really, the tobacco was so cool that everybody loved sniffing it, right? Maybe it's about something else. Really, the church was so captivating that everybody wanted to get to church. Really? Or maybe it's something else. Huh? Think about this. So, just like today's Coca-Cola contains no coca anymore, the tea, tobacco, and frankincense of 1600s contained very little of actual tea, tobacco, and frankincense. The main ingredients were, in fact, opium, coca, and hashish, back then at the very least. And think about this in this way as well. There's a saying, I'm not even sure if it's a saying, but it's kind of understandable if you think about this. Like, there's 3 ways of getting rich quick by trading, and that is if you trade humans, aka slavery / human trafficking, or weapons or drugs, right? I mean, like, these are the most expensive things in trade, in mass trade at the very least. So we know that Europeans, colonizers, blah blah blah, traded humans. We know that they traded a little bit of weapons, but where's the drug trade? Huh? Why is it absent from history? Why are we producing tens of thousands of tons of coca annually and it doesn't go anywhere apparently, even though the shelf life is 5 months? Huh? Why are we producing tens of thousands of opium, tons of opium, I mean, and it virtually disappears somewhere? Actually, did I show it to you? I don't think I did. But look, red is the sales. Again, it's according to these people I've quoted. Red is opium sales in tons. These are tons, and these are years. And the green one is production. So we actually don't need any other graph. So here we have roughly the same, sales red, green production. Then sales drop from 1880s to 1905. Sales drop, but the production skyrockets. So where's this opium going to? Where is it going to? People consume this, according to accounting books, but people produce this. I mean, it's a hidden drug trade. It's tea, quotation marks. It's tobacco, quotation marks. That's where it's going to, obviously, right? And also, last two comments. Remember Shkurin's logistical theory of civilization, right? The point I will make here on behalf of Shkurin, I respect him a lot actually, is that the world, as you can see, was already global in 1500s, right? Like right at the moment when international sailing was developed, which is again probably early 1500s, current chronology, the world was already global right at this moment, because again you can see that coca spreads, that opium spreads, everything spreads almost immediately, actually, in the span of a couple of decades. Like 1550s, all of Peru is obsessed with coca. In 1560s, it's already in the court of Medici, you know, the drug traders of Europe. Yeah. And also, people sometimes say, actually, let me give one more point here. So Shkurin, I have a video about his theory. This one. Please watch it if you want to know more details. Here I spent quite a while explaining how America was colonized, and also we talk about ley line theory, in case you're interested in esoteric BS. Just FYI, ley lines have nothing to do with esotericism. It's actually a very understandable thing. But anyway, think about this trope. People often say that private megacorporations is a sign of some sort of dystopia, you know, cyberpunk. But think about this again. The colonization epoch, the drug trade, the weapons trade, the human trade epoch, the open, I should have said, drug trade, weapon trade, human trade. Because obviously even today, all the governments pretty much do it, all the intelligence services do it, right? But back then, they weren't even ashamed of it. They did it openly, right? So didn't they also have private megacorporations back then? They did. East India Company, West India Company, these are private corporations. These are not governments. India was colonized privately. It wasn't Britain even colonizing it, right? West India Company is a private company. The colonization of Americas was also private, right? So everything we think about as globalism appeared already back then, right? These mega corporations built on this horrific stuff actually built the modern world, you know? Whether you like it or not, that's the case. So another thing to consider. Anyway, the final comment I will make here is a question, actually. To what degree this international drug trade, including the opium in churches, including the coca in tobacco, including possibly hashish, including stuff like this, to what degree does it help to start the modernity, you know? aka the modern society. Like philosophy started at this point with Descartes, right? Pretty much modern society goes from this epoch. So people say, you know, hallucinogenic drugs aided humanity's advancement in creative sense or whatever. Well, this is kind of another... I actually disagree with this, but still kind of makes you think. That's why I formulate it as a question, and that's why I actually don't have an answer, but I propose you to think about this. But again, I emphasize, think about the tea, think about the frankincense, think about tobacco. It's not what we think it was, I would argue, following all of these people to whom I'm very grateful.
Thank you for watching. The eons are closing.
If you wish to support me, please consider joining my Patreon. That is patreon.com/philosopher. See the link in the description. Or if you have a scientific theory of your own and you'd like my help in developing it, please join my alternative science coaching program, also available through Patreon.